Excellent. Hey guys, welcome to this session on building product. I will just quickly introduce myself and Monish, and then we will get on with the session. Monish, do you want to start with the introductions?
Sure, thank you so much, Manu. Hi, I'm Monish, and I'm an IIT Delhi pass out from the same batch as Manu, 91 to 95, and I've been in consulting, in entrepreneurship, and a significant part of my life in product management, leading products across organizations over the last 25 years. And my last stop was heading products and marketing for India and Middle East across for Equifax credit information systems. And I'm working as an independent product management consultant as we speak right now. That's a short and sweet introduction of my side. Over to you, Manu.
Thanks, Monish. As Monish said, we are both IIT Delhi 95 pass outs. My life, my career has also been mainly product management the last 20 years, B2B, starting with B2B, and then mostly consumer internet. I've worked with Match.com, Book My Show, Bharti Soft Bank, and the last thing I was doing was I had my own startup, which was a motorcycle taxi company based out of Gurgaon. So that is our introduction. And with that, let me start the presentation. So as we said, today we'll chat about building products. And what we'll chat about today is nothing to do with the, the very technical parts of product management, like the metrics, the queue management, the backlog management. We'll talk about a more interesting factor that I find very interesting, which is the human part of product management or human part of building a product. Why is that? Because all of us started as engineers, and I think a lot of the audience will also be engineers. And we as engineers always train to solve, the hard problems. We say, let's build a backend which has 0.5 millisecond response time. Let's try to solve this NP hard problem. Let's do this big data analysis. We are never trained to solve for human interactions to those backends. We are not trained for soft skills. And nobody says, I'm good at, I've been trained for, human interactions or customer interactions and all that. So that's what we are. And that's why I think, especially for engineer co-founders, this becomes very important to first know and then how to go about it. This is a quote. I love Paul Graham. He's the founder of Y Combinator, and he has some very, very beautiful writings, which I recommend everyone should go through. And this one is from this essay called Do Things That Do Not Scale. There are many things in there, and I'll have one more quote from it later, but he talks about you should take extraordinary measures, not just to acquire users, but also to make them happy. And why is that? Why should we make extraordinary efforts to make users happy? Think about this term, word of mouth. Word of mouth may be the single most effective, efficient way to acquire users, to retain them over a period of time, and to ensure that they are engaged with your apps. Let's just think about what I said here, right? Think about the times when somebody has come up to you and said, hey, are you trying to book a ticket? I have just used this app, and it's a beautiful app. I was able to book my ticket in no time at all. The financial transaction was very smooth. I was able to find what I was looking for. And that's when you said, yeah, maybe I'll try this, right? And just because he said it, you will try it. It's not because if you saw that in an ad or in a marketing campaign, you maybe would have thought about twice about it. But if a trusted friend says that to you, you will immediately try it. So that is why word of mouth is one of those things which, and how does word of mouth happen? Word of mouth happens on the basis of a person who's very happy with your app. He's actually delighted with your app. And what happens by this word of mouth thing, right? You will say that, one user is happy, he will tell two more users, but that's about it. But don't underestimate the power of the compounded growth. We always talk about compounded interest, right? One user will tell two, two will tell four. This pyramid is almost, it's a Fibonacci series. And suddenly you'll find that you'll have more users than you'll know what to do with. And that is why the whole point about making your users extremely happy becomes very important. So let's think about something today. This is a statement I kind of love to make to people I'm talking to people I'm mentoring, to people I'm teaching somebody. Your user interface is a virtual representation of you and your company to the user. You're not sitting in front of your user telling him, I'll book your ticket. It's your user interface which is doing that. Your user interface is also a representation of your backend because that's the only place the user is interacting with it. And that is why it makes sense for this user interface to have a personality of being decent human being a helpful human being, or being a decent and helpful entity. For technical founders, we typically tend to think of the UI as a CRUD interface to our DB. I've designed this beautiful schema, it can do everything. I have these beautiful business rules, and all the user needs to do is just fill in data into my database and they'll get the answers they need. But that's not how it works, because the users are very, very far removed from the technical representation of the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, Manu, it's a very good point that you raised out here. I think what struck me about that statement was the user interface is the personality of the company. It is almost like the human side of the company that you are representing on behalf of the entity, and that's the first interaction that the user has. So not only is it about the transaction, but it says a lot about the company also. About if the user interface is fun, the first impression you carry of that company at the back end is it must be a fun company because they have made a interaction which is fun to do. Your image of the company also starts building up through that interface. So it's not just only about the transaction. There is a lot more riding on that in terms of what that interaction does psychologically to the end consumer or the end user. So I think that's an interesting point you raised, Manu, about the personality of the interface also being displayed through that experience.
Yeah, Manish. And so exactly, right? And I also think about the user interface as, you're having a conversation with the user. Finally, what you're doing is you're having a conversation, you're having an interaction. Think about how you have interactions with your friends or with other people. I like to contrast two different interactions, right? Think about these two. The first interaction is you go to let's say a normal government office. I would say let's say to get a new driver's license, right? Think about what happens there. uh, First of all, you really don't know which window to go to, so you try to find that out. You're a confused state of mind. You go to the first window, and the person will not ask you for anything. It's you who will have to say, here's my filled in form, I need a driver's license. And especially in India, the typical response is he'll kind of flip through it and say, here, take it back. Like, whoa, what happened? Like, this thing is not filled in correctly. Like, okay, I will fill it in. Okay, let me do that. So you fill it in. You have to do it. I mean, there's no choice there, right? You fill it in. And then he'll again flip through it and he's like, go to window 4 and first have them do this, then I'll take a look at this. So you are in line, now you go to another line, you're doing all this. So think of your mental state about it. Would you say that, given a chance, would you ever want to visit that driver's license office again in your life? Would you tell somebody to do it? No. You won't, right? Contrast that with somebody going to, let's say, a nice hotel. I'm not even talking about a 5-star, right? There's some place which cares for you. You go to the reception and you say, I have a booking. So, no, sorry, my bad. You'll be first welcome. You say, hi, Manish, how are you? Or hello, sir, what can I do for you today? Nice, interesting. And then you'll say, I have a booking. Nobody will ask you, what's your booking ID number? No, they'll say, sir, what's your name? And that's something you remember. You say, my name is Monish Das, and say, let me look that up for you. Uh, and if there's a problem, sir, I don't see it right here. Let me talk to my colleague. I will fix this for you. And then you'll say, Monish will say, by the way, my friend Manu is also coming and staying with me. Said, don't worry, I'll put them in a room next to you. It's all good. And I will let you know when he's here. So the contrast between those two conversations and interactions is what is the hotel receptionist or concierge doing, which is the driver's license clerk is not doing. One is he is more of a person, right? He's having a nice personality. And secondly, he's anticipating and assuming a lot of things for you. He's anticipating that, of course, you've come to a hotel, you will have a reservation, or this is what you want to do. He's also facilitating you in a lot of ways, which is, I can't find it here. It's not your burden now to get it, it's my burden. So I will go and get it from some other place. I'll fix it on my side. So that's the basic difference in conversations, interactions that I want you guys to start off with. That's how your conversation or interaction with your user needs to be. Those are the things you need to keep in mind when starting that whole process. So let's talk about what is this thing that we're calling a user interface, a user interaction, and let's try to go through some definitions, some descriptions, and then we'll talk about how do we go about this process and how do we make the user more comfortable. When we talk about UI design or user interface design, or let's say when we start designing your UI, the initial thought is the first step here is the UI design, which is a series of static rectangles, colors, lines, text, which represents one state of the UI. It says that, this is the login screen. These are the 5 elements that they'll be there. All well and good. And I'm assuming that if you have a decent enough UI designer, it will look good. The colors will be nice, of course, all those things, I'm assuming. If your UI designer is slightly better or more competent, and if you insist in a certain way, you will get something called UI states, right? For example, the button might have a pressed state, the UI might have an empty state, the UI might have a loading state, and all those things are not, default. All those things need to be designed, they need to look good. So let's go across those two things. Let's come into the third part, which is interaction design. And we'll also talk about something called user flows. The last layer in this journey is user journeys, which encompasses things more than just the product. And we'll skip that part. So let's go into details into the interaction design and user flows. Interaction design, let's talk about this, right? So we talked about, I think Munish also mentioned to this, the app is a personality. The app needs to have a personality. Why does an app need to have a personality? Because it's important for the app to be perceived as a person. Why is that necessary? Because people relate better to other people rather than to a technical user interface or a computer screen. And going back to the point about consumer delight, right? People will remember your app if your app has a certain personality, if it has certain quirks, if it's more human, if it's more relatable. And to get to that point is why we talk about a lot of things on interaction design. And what I'll do is I'll talk through one point at a time, and then we'll talk about examples. So the first thing I want to talk about is context and prediction and assumptions. We talked about this in the conversation example. Context in the first case simply was in the hotel conversation was they know that you're at a hotel and you want to have a room and that you have a booking. A prediction is saying, you told me that your friend is coming. I'm assuming that you want him to have a room next to you. And assumption is you pre-fill certain information about the user. You say, so let's take an example and work through it. Okay. Um, uh, Anybody recognize what this is? If not, I'll just tell you, this is the create tweet screen from the Twitter app. It's the default Twitter app. I've just pressed the create button. And this is what I'm seeing. First, it's prompting me very nicely to say it's a blank screen, and blank screens are typically very intimidating. So it's saying what's happening, prompting me to write a text. The second thing you see is almost, let's say 60 to 70% of people who are creating a new tweet want to add a picture to it. So what has Twitter done? Twitter has added a stream of my last taken 3 or 4 pictures from my photo stream on my phone right there. All I have to do is tap on it and that photo is added onto the tweet. And
It's
that
interesting
is,
that you,
go ahead, Manish.
yeah, and it's interesting you brought this up because this once you show this kind of a design, it seems most obvious. Like this is the most natural thing for an app to do. But it's surprising that the number of apps actually do not have this feature. Like what just Manu mentioned, it's so intuitive that if I am trying to post a picture, most likely it's going to be my last 3 or 4 pictures I've taken. But correct me if I'm wrong, Manu, I don't think Instagram still has this feature. Like if I want to post it, still doesn't show me my last 3 or 4. I still have to search through my gallery. I still have to open my gallery. So it's such an
Hey,
intuitive thing, natural thing. But it seems obvious when Manu is talking about it, but you'll be surprised as the number of apps which still don't use this very simple, intuitive, and as Manu pointed out, being helpful to the user on the first conversation of making them feel I know what you want and answering that. So I think that's my first reaction whenever I see this kind of an example.
you kind of dated me there, Monish, by asking me about Instagram. I don't use Instagram. So I don't know what Instagram does. So, uh, but I don't know. I trust you on that, what you're saying. Okay.
No, I'm just, I mean, I last remember, I mean, I'm also not a great Instagram user, but I last remember not seeing this feature on Instagram. And this would seem like the most obvious feature to be there because Instagram is about pictures ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, let's take another example. Uh, this is more an example in context. What I'm showing you is a screen from the Pocket app. For people who don't know, Pocket is an app which helps you save articles you want to read later, and it saves it in the Pocket app. And then when you're offline or when you have time, you can go back and read them later. Uh, so the context is I've copied a URL from, let's say, Chrome or anywhere else. And when I open Pocket, this is the prompt I see. I see add copied URL to your list. That's the question. And the URL is mentioned down below. Now, again, right, uh, if I have copied it's not that whenever I open Pocket that I am looking to paste a URL. It's that if I have a URL on my clipboard, very likely that I will be wanting to paste that URL into Pocket. So again, a great example of using context and assumption to simplify life for the user. Okay. Uh, let's go back to the list of things that we're talking about. The next 2 or 3 examples I'll give are for microcopy and micro interactions. What is microcopy? Microcopy is just those small tidbits of text that you put. It's not your thing saying, it's not your text label. It's not your uh, dry error message. And I'll give you examples of this. And same with micro interactions. Micro interactions are not your screen transitions or your big thing. It's things that you see in an app when you press a button. And let me give you examples and you'll realize more what I'm talking about. And again, same as Monish said, right? These are things you don't notice in an app. But when I point it out, you'll see how they work and how you enjoy them. This is a GIF. I hope you can see the animation. Monish, can you just confirm the
Yeah,
animation is working?
yeah,
Okay.
I can see that. Yeah.
So this is a very simple example, right? This is a totally non-functional micro interaction. What it's doing is when the user is entering the email address, the owl is on top. When it enters the password, the owl uses its hands to cover the eyes. Nothing functional about it. But I, as a user, will remember this. One, the animation, just the motion catches the eye and you kind of see it. And the second is the next time I'm talking to somebody, right, I will remember this interaction and I will say, oh, even if I don't remember the interaction, I will remember the app. So I'll say in this particular app, I think it's Owler or something, I don't remember. Uh, Use this app because I had a moment of delight while using the app. I will not say it that way. I will not say that, I had a moment of delight while using this app. You will say, this app is cool. Use this app. And that recommendation, that word of mouth will count for a lot for the other user.
Yeah.
So let's take
And I
another
think,
example. Go ahead,
yeah,
Manish.
Manu, I think one interesting thing when I also first saw this is that although it's really cool and funky, it's not over the top. So you remember it because it's subtle. It's not in your face. So I think that's one important thing when you talk about micro interaction is it has to be subtle. It has to be in the background so that you remember it not because it's in your face, but because it triggers an emotion in you. Like here, probably as Manu said, it's cute. It's something you remember, and it's very different. And but it's very subtle. It's not something which you would really bother about even if you don't notice it. And I think that's a big skill in doing these small things to make your app remember. It doesn't necessarily, so the takeaway, Manu, correct me if I'm wrong, is you really don't need to move the earth to make your app look different or be memorable. These small creative aspects also create a memorable experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a really different journey from the usual stuff. That's my
No,
first
no,
impression itself.
I totally agree with you, Manish. And the other thing which we'll come to later is actually, let's talk about it later. Uh, and let's go to the next example first. Okay. This example is from anybody can recognize this. This is very typical. If somebody has done email marketing, they'll know this. This is MailChimp. Okay. All this is saying is you kind of press the send button on your emails. And the first time you have a list of 10,000 customers and you compose an email and send it out, it's a very nervous moment for a marketing person, right? You want to make sure that it's done. Will they get it? Am I have it done it correctly? You've done it in a new app. It's a new thing for you. So look at this. It says, high five. Your mail is in the send queue and will go out shortly. It's a confirmation. It's an affirmation of you. It's a sense of, again, an emotional response for you saying, all is good in the world. You've done the right thing. More examples. Okay. This is an interesting one, and I'll walk you through it. The different aspects of this example, right? This is a typical e-commerce store on an app, and pardon me if most of my examples are from apps. Uh, so how it begins is, let me wait. It's the normal state. This normal state. So typically the button there which says add to cart. You press add to cart, and the image shifts up a little bit. Now, this is not purely an aesthetic thing. What it's also doing, it's drawing attention to the fact that the quantity chooser is right there where the image exposed some space. Okay. So it's almost a prompt, almost an invitation to the user to press that button. Okay. So now let's say the user does that. He goes in there, he presses the button, he does that, and see the shopping cart changes into a tick mark. And when you press that, there's this animation which says that I'm working in the background and it's happened. Again, A beautiful animation turns green, which confirms to the user that what you intended to do has been done. And lastly, I want you to see the thing that slides in from the bottom left at the end of this, right? It's saying that the total amount that your cart signifies has now changed. It was 580 euros, now it's 780 euros, or whatever it is, right? So again, drawing your attention to the fact that this has also changed. So this interaction is beautiful in so many ways because it's so functional also. It's guiding the user, it's giving feedback to the user, it's encouraging the user to do certain things, and of course, it's triggering the emotional response that Monish talked about. Nobody has to do this. You don't have e-commerce stores are thousands. Nobody has to do this. People know how to use e-commerce stores. But for your e-commerce app or your e-commerce store to stand out, if you do something like this, think about what reaction it will have in the users. This will be the cool app. This will be the app they talk about. And that's again goes back to the point about word of mouth. They will talk about this app to other people. Monish, anything on this?
No, I think I completely agree with you that I think this is one interaction as you pointed out, especially if you're in a crowded environment where your app has to or your product has to compete with a lot of different products in the same like e-commerce being a classical example. It's very difficult to differentiate purely on the basis of a larger user interaction. And as Manu and I were talking earlier, in India, people tend to shift to the next site, which offers the smallest little discount. But an experience change could potentially also make people. So once they finish the discount on one site, most likely they will remember this site and come back to this site. So among the 100 sites they would have visited, they would have probably visited 99 sites for the discount, but they're likely to come back here because they are just being treated differently. So I think it goes back to the fact that it gives you that this particular e-commerce site is selling things differently. They might all be selling chairs, but it just goes back to the fact that it gives you the personality of the company, of the product, and it's showcasing through these very small subtle change. Even the color scheme that is being used out here has a very pleasing kind of effect. So all this kind of combines together in the overall user interaction or the user experience, as we call it in the industry, um, in what the reaction is of the user to the particular experience. So I agree completely. I mean, I love this example as well.
Awesome. And we talk about India, right? In India, yes, people are diverted very quickly from one app to the other by a small discount or this thing. The user loyalty is not very great. Um, but again, you're not making that much money in India if you're competing with so many people, if you're just competing on price. Uh, if you're targeting this audience to this app towards a Western audience, they are the ones who will come back to this and pay more just for that experience. So if you want to make money and especially expose your app to a Western audience, to a more sophisticated audience, you have to get into this. Okay. Um, Monish, quick time check. We are about a half an hour into this. Are there a lot of questions? Should we continue or should I speed it up? Any ideas?
I don't see any questions as of now, so I guess we can continue.
Okay.
Or if there
Okay.
are any questions, people, if you have any questions, they can post online, and then we can check on that later.
Yes, we'll continue checking questions on the chat interface, and
Sure.
if yeah, so I'll continue with this. Okay, this last example, my favorite because I was kind of involved in the design of this thing, is again an example of context and assumption and a little bit of humor and microcopy. So in Book My Show, and this is an old example of the app, uh, when you come to the screen which says how many tickets, right? It starts with two. The quantity is two. And why is that? Because at Book My Show, we found out that, most people book 2 tickets. So why not have two as a default? It shows a motorcycle, you're going to a movie, you're taking a girlfriend with you. That's a normal assumption. Now, what happens when you say one? Ah, switches to a bicycle and the small thing, riding solo. It's, this is not functional at all. Okay. This is not encouraging you to do anything or encourage any behavior. It's just pleasing. It's just happy. It's just fun. Okay. And similarly, on the third one, it shows an auto. This is a Bombay based app. It shows an auto. Three people can't go on a motorcycle, an auto. Not functional at all. Very fun, very memorable. Okay. Uh, let's go back to the this thing. So we talked about micro copy, micro interactions. We talked about feedback when a user is doing something, a positive feedback or a negative feedback. Haptics is again something I really, really appreciate. I don't know if you see in some apps, right? When you press that button or when that tick mark happens, there's a small vibration because your finger is already on the screen. There's a small vibration, not perceptible normally, small vibration and a ting, small ting, which again gives you that feeling that, it's done, it's happened, it's a positive confirmation of what's happening. Okay. Uh, so let's kind of go to the next topic of discussion, which we have, which is user flows. What is a user flow? So user flow is, we've just talked till now about screens and interactions within screens and how you are guiding a user through certain parts of the screen. A user flow is one level further, which is says, how are you guiding your users through the app from one screen to the next? From a login screen, where are you going? If you're on the checkout cart, does the user know where he is? Does he know that in his mental model, is this a place where he needs to press the checkout button, and is he ready to make the payment at that point? The second thing is, there's a lot of contextual information which apps sometimes receive, especially mobile apps, right? Um, you click on a link to say, buy this item, which is your marketing link. Are you sure that when a user comes into your app, let's say he has to log in first, is he coming to that screen, to that event, to that reward that he was promised in that marketing message? Is he coming to that particular discount, which he was shown in that marketing message? So it's very, very important for you to make sure that the flows in your app are, one, contextual. They are taking the context from where the user is coming in, what he's expecting, and taking him there. And second, they are simple enough. They map to a certain mental model in the user's mind, so he's not uncomfortable while navigating the app. If he's on a cart, if he needs to know that, now is the time for a checkout. If he's on a product screen, he needs to be able to see how many more items are there in the cart, things of that nature. And um, and I'll talk about how to do this. This is what happens typically in apps is, right, these are when you are, even you as a product manager are going through an app, you're taking one screen at a time. You're seeing, this is one screen, this is the next screen, this is the third screen. By the time you reach the third screen, you've kind of lost some elements in your mind. Human mind can't retain that much. You've lost some elements from first screen, saying, what did we start off with there? What did we start the user off on? What journey did he start off on? And on the third or fourth screen, is he actually getting to that portion? So I'll talk about one very simple way to kind of do this. This was just a description of what I was talking about. Okay. Um, so this is an example of a user flow. Um, this is one way to do it. What you have is a software where all your screens are put there, and you have drawn these paths for a user which a user can take. It helps you make sure that the users are taking the right path. There are no extra paths. If a user wants to go from one screen to the other, these are conscious decisions you're making, that should I allow a user to go from one screen to the next? These are not accidentally a user presses something and goes to a completely different part of the app. So it's very important for you to visualize this in this form or in some form, so you know what are the different available parts in your app. Now let's talk about uh, how to get there, right? We talked about a lot of different things that you need to do, the interactions, the delightful moments, the user flows, caring about the user. How do you go about this? And I think the one major or the one big thing that we need to talk about here is empathy. You need to genuinely want to help your users. And now I'm not saying that most founders don't. Most founders want to solve a problem, but you also need to go that extra step and you say, how do I help the user solve his problem? It is not an abstract problem. To the user, it's his problem. He deals with it every day. You have to help him do that. You have to help him become a better version of himself. That's what your app is all about. Okay. How do you get empathy? How do you know what your user wants? How do you kind of put yourself in the mind of the user to help him? Let's talk about this. Okay. First thing, and I think probably the biggest one, talk to the users. When we are a small company, when we start a company, we talk to our friends to validate the ideas. We even show the first few versions of the app to them. We will talk to maybe one or two people to see how it's working. But then we say, we know this problem, we are solving it, and we know how to solve it. I'm a good technical guy, I'm a good product manager, I know how to solve it. But I can't emphasize how important it is to continue this talk or continue this interaction with the user throughout the life of your app. And how important is it for the founder, for the CEO, for the CPO to do this? The other part of this is, right, when you listen to them, don't have presumptions in your mind that, this user doesn't know what he's talking about, or this user is not my target user, or, this user is kind of, he's saying something which doesn't seem right. Listen without prejudice, and you can make the judgments later. Because whatever he's doing, he's using your app, he's trying to solve a problem with the app, and if he's not being able to do it or doing something wrong with it, it's your problem, not his. Okay. The next is ask questions. Or actually, in a better way, the better way to do it might be to just observe behavior. Ask questions biases the user. If you say, how do you like this app? Most people say, yeah, it's cool, yeah. But the second thing is, if you're watching them use the app and you realize that, in your mind, the user should have gone on a certain path, but he's either struggling to find that path or not finding that path, then again, you have a problem. So you observe them using your app, and that's the other thing, right? Watch them use your product. Yeah, that's what I said. Third thing, hang out with the support folks. They get a lot of queries which don't necessarily trickle up to you as a product manager, as a CEO, as a CPO, whatever, as a CTO. But do spend some time hanging out with them. I think Zappos had this mandate that everybody had to spend one day out of every 15 days just doing customer support. And Zappos is probably the most biggest famous example of customer support that is talked about in the industry. Okay. And the last thing, very funnily, and I've discovered a lot of things by this, have your mom use your app. Okay. And again, I might be dating myself here. My mom is not a technology person because she didn't grow up with this. Maybe there are some people in there whose moms did grow up with this, so maybe it may not be true anymore. But I've discovered a lot of things by watching my mom use my app and her asking me questions about it, because that's kind of the level of a genuine actual user that you'll find on the street. Nothing against my mom. That's people are if you think your mom is able to use that app nicely without any problems, then I think you have it made. That's the thing. Manish, anything?
No, we're good. I think just in the interest of time, just to do a cross check, we'll probably be doing about 15 more minutes. I hope everyone is okay with that because we are almost at 5 right now. So we'll just extend it by 15 minutes if everybody's okay with it. And we'll just continue with the, I noticed there is two questions. I noticed I have replied one on chat, and any other questions, please keep filling it in, and we will address them as we go forward. But I think if everybody's okay with it, we'll just extend it by 15 minutes. Is that okay?
Okay, I'll quickly go through these. This is slides.
Sure.
So this is another one I said, right? If you're going through user flows, very simple, very simple. Everybody can do it, especially if you don't know the app well. And even if you do, all the screens, print out all the screens of your app. Take screenshots, print out all the screens of your app, put them on a wall. The visualization that you'll get about your app there, the inconsistencies between one screen and the next is invaluable. I've had so many people tell me that this is kind of the best thing that somebody has told me. And it's not my thing. I've also heard it from somebody. That's why I started doing it. So anyway, put them on a screen, maybe draw threads across them to see what are the flows, but just printing them, putting them on a wall is good enough. Okay, I will let Munish take on this next section. Munish has worked more on the B2B side of things, and he has some very interesting perspectives on the B2B side of this user interaction design.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manu, for those interesting tools and tidbits about user interaction. And I think what I'll do is I'll kind of stitch whatever Manu has mentioned up till now and try and focus on one specific area of product development. And there's a specific reason why I would like to do that. Manu and I were discussing this earlier. I think most of us are very, very familiar with B2C apps and products, especially in the last 5 to 10 years when it has kind of taken over our lives. I mean, we do it for pretty much every action in our daily lives. What you also have to remember is there is this whole set of products which are designed not for the end consumer, but actually for the business user. And what I'll try and do is try to contextualize the B2B product design space and kind of tie that into a lot of the tools and great pointers which Manu has given over this presentation so that you can actually make them use and kind of understand how many of these can be used in different areas. So let me start by talking about the context. I think one of the biggest thing when you are designing a product is to understand the context of that particular product. Now, if I look at the B2B space, you as a person will have a very different persona or a personality at work compared to when you are not at work. And the same activity, if you're doing at work, you will do it very differently compared to how you would be doing that when you are doing it for yourself. I'll just give a simple example. If you're to book a flight ticket for your personal use, you're most likely going to focus on the cheapest option, and you don't mind if it takes a longer time for that particular flight to reach your destination. I mean, of course, given your holidays schedule taken into account. But when you're at work, the factor that is important, of course, price is important, is how fast you reach your destination because you want to save time. So the same action, it changes, and how your experience for that particular action of booking a ticket would change based on the context. You're doing the same thing, but the context is changing the way you need to do that. And I think that is something that we need to understand. What does that context mean? And I'll just take the example of B2B space because it'll give you some comparisons in terms of how you behave at work and how you behave as a consumer changes the way you interact with an app. If you can go to the next slide, Manu. So let's try and understand what the business user is like and how it's different from being a consumer. And the most important thing that you need to look at is, for a business user, you're designing for a role. People change in a role. It is not an individual that you're focusing on. So one of the biggest concepts or the biggest areas you need to focus on is understand that role well. You of course need to understand the individual who's associated with the role, but the role is central to your designing of that particular product, especially in the B2B space. The other thing that we need to understand very well when it comes to business driven products or business to business kind of product is there needs to be a distinct outcome for that particular interaction. It's not Candy Crush. I mean, you are not using that app to kill time or just have some fun. You're not playing a game. So the outcome is very, very important in your designing of the interface or the experience. Because at any point in time, if you think that this is great, nice, fun interaction, but it's actually wasting somebody's time, it may be a fantastic interaction, but if it is wasting somebody's time, it will probably not be taken too well, especially in the business environment. So you need to understand, we need to understand that very well when we are designing something for the B2B space. And one of the important things that we all understand and also acknowledge, but not at work, outside work, that when it's a job, it's most likely not fun. You're not doing it for fun. You're probably doing it because you need to do it. So if your interaction is part of the job, you need to understand that interaction, how it's happening for that person. He or she needs to do that to get a result out of it. So that interaction also needs to be made interesting, taking into account the job, the overall scenario in which that particular interaction is happening. And the other thing that is also true for work tends to get repetitive, and of course, it gets tiring and boring. Now, this is the overall context in what we are saying that in general, what are challenges you will face when you're building a B2B kind of scenario. Now, how do you approach this from a user experience perspective when these are the boundaries that you are being given to start with? And of course, given the shortage of time, we're just talking about a very high level, but just from an approach perspective. You can go to the next slide, Manu. So let's put whatever Manu has spoken of, and let's see how we can use those tools in trying to address each of those areas of the B2B space. Manu spoke about empathy. Manu spoke about how you really need to listen to your customer. Here, the biggest thing that we need to do when we are looking at the business side of it, understand the role. It's more than just the consumer, but understanding what the role is. So you have to listen to the user. One of the biggest challenges I've seen people tend to do is they assume that they know what that role is. And we tend to kind of make a flow or a design saying, this is what the role should be like. One of the biggest things that we should not do is assume about what people are doing at work. We should spend time with, however lowly that may appear from our perspective, or however elementary that task may seem to us. And one of the things which will come later will come from that in how that interaction is defined, is to really understand what that role means, and then also look at multiple people associated with that role. So if you're talking, what in my experience you should do is talk to multiple people in each role, because you'll get an idea of how different people are playing the same role differently, which will give you a lot of insight into how people are potentially are going to use that role. So don't just assume that I have met one person, so I know everything about the role. That will probably end up in a bad design at the end of it. Manu spoke a lot about the flow, about the user interaction journey and the user journeys. I think especially in the B2B space, user journeys are very, very critical. We really need to get the entire flow of how the work happens in one place. And a very good way of doing that is design, at least even if you sketch out your screens and put it out on a wall. That's a great way of doing it, because that will give you an entire idea of how complex the different interactions and flows are from in a business scenario. And I think it is something, there is no shortcut here. the best way, and I agree with Manu, it's probably one of the most comprehensive ways, is to just visualize it in one place. And the best way to do it is a wall. You don't have screens which are 100-inch. If you had, great, but you don't. So ideally you should follow that step, and that flow will help you understand the complexity of that flow in the business which you need to address. And understanding that whole flow is what will help you put in that delight in the end to the customer experience. If you don't understand the flow, you'll be solving part of the problem. You'll probably miss out an opportunity to provide a delight of that part of it. We spoke about the job. It is a job. In the business side of it, they're not doing it to kill time or have fun or talk to friends, which are emotionally uplifting experiences. I'm sure there are a lot of people who love the job as well, but for a majority of the people, the job is something they need to do. So make it fun, but in a B2B scenario, it shouldn't be distracting from their work. You should be able to put in, like the example which Manu gave about the micro interaction, which are nice, very subtle. So it's important to keep that fun part subtle. Like providing a massive pop-up with multiple colors in it may sound fun for people who are in the 10 to 15 year age bracket, but is extremely distracting and annoying for a person who's trying to do their job. For example, if you have sounds that keep popping up in the background, it may be a fun thing in a Candy Crush, but it's extremely distracting if you're working in a if you're using that in a work environment. So the context of the user would help you define what micro interaction to do, what micro copy to use, what messages to give, which will make that person's life a little more fun, but at the same time won't prevent him from doing his or her job. So three things that Manu spoke about are very, very critical when you're designing flows in the B2B space. And going back to the listening to the customer. Now, we spoke about the fact that some of the jobs could become tiring and repetitive. And how do you make that repetition go away? One of the ways, of course, is by providing a nice color scheme, by providing a nice interaction. But one of the things when you observe people on the ground is that people tend to do a job much faster when they're doing keyboard shortcuts. Now, one of the biggest challenges you will face when you're designing a product is to provide everything through nice graphical user interface, because they look colorful, they look nice, and you assume that a lot of people will like that. But if you talk to enough number of people, you will find a certain number of people who don't care about how beautiful the interface is. They just want the job done fast. So what we spoke about, speak to multiple people, you will at the end of it provide a real delight to the end user of your product, not by providing a great interaction. And maybe if they don't care about the micro interaction also, but they care about it if you have provided an option for keyboard shortcut. It may be an option, but for some people, they might actually, the power user, especially of products, I mean, power user people who use the product very, very regularly are likely to be people who use keyboard shortcuts. So although its tendency is to make very nice looking interfaces, sometimes people don't care about it. And it's not that they don't like it, but you're actually helping them by not giving them a great GUI, but providing a keyboard shortcuts. Now, this is something, the part of the reason we are discussing this is we have gotten so used to talking about consumer facing interfaces that a lot of the discussion goes into treating every customer or every end user like a consumer. So you have to keep in mind that in certain scenarios, you may have to rethink that kind of an approach. What I'll do is I'll just take an example of one particular B2B site and just give you a context of, I don't know how many of you have used or heard of Canva. For those people who have not heard of this company, it's hardly about 7 or 8 year old company. It's an Australian company,
Yeah.
which started off with a very simple premise. The problem statement that they were trying to address was that of creating marketing collaterals. And the challenges which used to happen and still does is that the design space is very diverse. So you have multiple players in the design space. You will need a designer. You will need people who have skills in terms of printing. You will have different sources like stock photos, multiple things which you need to coordinate. And the group who are aspiring to be product managers or already are product managers, this would sooner or later come as part of your role, which is product marketing, in which collateral development and all are key parts of it. So what Canva did, and they have done it so successfully that I think this year the valuation almost doubled to almost $6 billion this year. It's a small company, it's like a hardly 1,000 people company. What they've done is they have put all the different elements of designing a collateral as a problem statement into one place. Now if you ever use something else, like I would encourage you to just try creating something on Adobe has a free version as well, and try creating something on Canva. You'll realize that just the way they have done it. So if you notice, the first thing that this is design anything, the moment you haven't even typed anything, it tells you what are the options of what you want to design to start with, and gives you a large amount of options. What it does, it kind of trying to anticipate what your needs are, as Manu started in the beginning, and kind of helping you guide through that journey by telling you that if you want to do this, I will help you get that job done. Compared to any other site, majority of the sites, what they do is they say sign up for free, and that's your starting point. This particular site doesn't ask you to sign up. You can start by creating something. So a simple experience like this, what it does is, I mean, there are a lot of other features in interest of time. I will not touch upon those right now. But essentially, what we are trying to drive at in this whole conversation with Manu and I trying to drive at is, if you understand and spend time and listen to your customer and their problem, that's your starting point from designing a great product. And it's not about the technology only at the back end, which we tend to focus on a lot more, but the human side of it. Ultimately, it's a human being which is interacting with your product. So you have to treat that human being as a human being. You cannot treat that human being as a machine and say that that person cannot interact with it because that person doesn't understand technology. That may be true, but that person is still a human and you want that person to use. So make it as useful, as empathetic, as easy to use from a experience perspective for your product to actually connect to. I think the key word that I like using is, how are you able to connect to your end user at an emotional level? If you can do that, your product, you can have the best product. If you're not able to connect emotionally to your end customer, end user, I think you have lost half the battle. So from my side, I think those are the key takeaways. I also wanted to just add on to. Manu, any last words before you wind up?
No, I think Manish, you definitely touched upon because typically most UX design courses and talks and presentations talk about consumer focus. But in a lot of the companies that are being made today are SaaS companies and with a business audience, and these things become very important when you design for those kind of users. Amazing, very cool. Okay, I'll leave everybody with the set of resources, and I'll just quickly walk through them. The first two are great resources to go for in terms of UX design. Just, how do you design a drop down? What are the different ways of doing it? How do you do a HTML form? Uh, Good references. The third is a awesome resource. If you're not a designer and you want to and you want to create a good UI, um, just go through it. There's a book also that they sell, which is kind of expensive but worth it in some ways. The fourth one, the growth dot design, is what we talked about. It captures a lot of the crux of what we've talked about. It walks you through user journeys in certain apps of people. Um, And one thing I would definitely want you guys to look in there is of an app called Superhuman, which is an example of a business app, something like Manish talked about. Definitely go there. Paul Graham, this is his talk, which I've taken quotes from. If you've not gone through this, any founder needs to do this. And the last one, again, another good example of resources. So um, that's all we have. Manish, any examples? Sorry, any questions that we need to answer at this point of time?
I don't see any more. Let me just cross check once if there are any more questions that have come up. So there are two questions. I think there is. Let me just go through some of the questions. Avi has mentioned that the last one is relevant for consumer facing apps. Avi, I'm not sure which particular slide you're referring to, but my guess is that Avi's question is related to the examples that you gave. So, in a way, Avi, I think the short answer to that is user experience is not just for consumer facing app, and it is also about any interaction that is happening with the end user. So it doesn't necessarily have to be consumer facing only. I hope that answers your question. Um, Srinivas has a question on we're building a cloud-based telemetry applications. Any suggestions for the UI design for it? Manu, any thoughts on that?
Um, Again, I think it seems like more of a B2B use case. But this is again a case where you are dealing with probably a lot of data, a lot of complex data, and you have to be able to understand and present it to the users in a form that is actionable, understandable, um, and kind of, it's easy to say you have to remove the complexity from this thing. uh, I'm not saying it's an easy job to do, but uh, just pure UI, go through some of these resources which will help you figure out how to present data nicely, statically. Then you have to layer on interactions on top of it. But first of all, a good static UI design is a very, very important place to start, especially if you have this much data.
Got it. Yeah. So just to add a little bit to that, as Manu pointed out, that especially apps which are very heavy on data have a special need for presenting that data in a friendly manner. It's very easy to lose your customer if you are not able to help the customer make sense of the data you're presenting. So especially when you're talking of telemetry applications which have a massive source of data coming in on a regular basis, um, the user journey probably is the first step which you need to really spend time on. Essentially understand who are the types of end users you potentially have, spend time with them and understand what is it that we are trying to solve using our telemetry application. And I think there is no two ways about it. Um, uh, if it takes time, it will take time. But if you don't, I mean, the point which Manu also made earlier is that there is no shortcut to understanding the user. Please don't assume. Spend time with them, understand what the requirement is, and especially if you have a lot of data, try and see which part of the data they really would make their life easier, and then design the application, the interfaces based on that. So that's probably this thing. Sahil has a question around, tell us something about the O2O business model. Did you mean B2B? Is that O2O something? Manu, are you familiar with that?
I don't know the term. Again, maybe we are dating ourselves, Manish.
Yeah, Sahil, do
Ooh.
you want to clarify whether you meant B2B or because I read that as O2O out here. So I was not sure. Um, is there something that I'm missing out here? Avi just clarified that he was referring to your mom using the app, so he kind of got the answer to that.
Sorry, I didn't get it.
Okay, so Avi is mentioning O2 is offline to online.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not even sure whether that's a that's a business model. I mean,
It's
is there a model behind it? I mean, offline to
it
online is purely interaction method in my view.
are we talking about bringing offline transactions online? Is that the uh,
Yeah. So are we talking? That's more like a digitization problem.
yeah, I would not comment until I understand what that
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of hard to say because, I mean, from at least from a UI perspective or a user experience perspective, I don't think there's any differentiation from a business model or an approach
Yeah,
because
I
it,
agree.
it is not linked to a business model. And I think that's the reason why we also in our talk wanted to touch upon B2B just to highlight that changing the business model or the method does not change the basic principles um, uh, of a user experience. So yeah, I think that's what we also clarified, that it's a hybrid business model from offline to online. So I think the only difference here would be that if you're looking at an offline interaction, that goes beyond the way you are looking at it from the toolkit, the tool sets that you're using for making it happen. So if your user experience involves going to a store, let me give a different example. I kind of understand where this question is coming from.
Hmm.
In the user experience space, and Manu, you can add to that, what we call the assisted interaction. This is not really a different stream or anything. It basically means that it's like a person at a counter helping you
Got it.
complete your transaction.
Got it.
Now,
Got it.
from a user journey perspective, I don't think it changes anything. It is just the tools you're using at that point in time, which would change a little bit. So instead of the person typing in the information, the person is actually talking about it to someone, and
Mhm.
that information is getting in, or a machine is interacting with you in helping you close that. So from a user experience, the tools and the methods remain exactly the same. It is just a question of what you are putting in place at a point in time to make that interaction happen. It could mean that a person intervenes instead of a
Mhm.
chatbot intervening. So that's the
Mhm.
only difference. But from a principle, I don't think there anything changes on that. Manu, any comments on that?
The only thing I can think of is right. We if once you say that, I think about it. Right, when my mom wants to book a ticket, she'll call me, right, and that's the assisted interaction. So yes, I'm doing that thing for her, but the app I choose to use also, again, I choose the app which allows me to do it in the best possible way. Um, and if I'm doing it professionally, for a lot of people, I would treat it as a B2B application where I want to do things fast, and it remembers what I did for certain people. So all those things still make sense. Totally, Manish.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Mm, sure. Okay, so I think we have run out of time. We just got a message from the moderator on that. So from my side, thank you everyone who has taken time out to join this session. And this has been a pleasurable experience for both Manu and me in presenting this to you guys. And Manu, any closing remarks for the session?
No, I think definitely, Manish. It was a good experience because we chatted a lot about this before while preparing it and learned a lot from each other. Manish gave me a lot of good feedback on this, so it was a learning experience for us also, as it always should be. And definitely, everybody, thanks for joining us. Hit us up with questions later. Uh, you're most welcome. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Manu, maybe we can share our email IDs for people. Please feel free to drop us notes or mails if you need any information from our side, we're happy to help. So you can probably just add our mail IDs at the end of it, and after that, we can probably share the um,
Presentation, yes. Before
information.
sharing, I'll definitely add our contact center.
Perfect.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you guys
Thank you
again.
so much, everyone. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time.